It is 115 AD in Rome. The sun has not yet crested the distant Alban hills, but the sky is turning a bruised purple above the sleeping city. We are here to observe the quiet, early morning routine of Lucia, a woman who works in the steam and suds of a Roman fullery, essentially a large-scale laundry. The air is cool and smells faintly of wood smoke and damp stone. A heavy silence hanging over the cobblestones before the roar of the empire begins. While emperors rise and fall and borders shift on maps, the simple, human rhythm of waking up to face a day of work remains a constant across the centuries. Now, lower the lights, let the room grow calm, and together, let's step into today's story. We begin in the dark. It is not a complete, pitch-black darkness, but the soft, grey obscurity of a room waiting for the morning. Lucia is asleep on a simple pallet, a mattress stuffed with reeds and wool, raised slightly off the floor on a wooden frame. She lives on the 4th floor of an insula, one of the massive apartment blocks that dominate the skyline of Rome, housing the vast majority of its citizens. These buildings are a marvel of ancient engineering, even if they lean a little precariously over the narrow streets. It is a strange thought, but living in a high-rise apartment is not a modern invention. It is a distinctly Roman experience. The higher up you live in the insula, the lower your rent. But the more stairs you have to climb and the smaller your windows are. Lucia is high enough up that she can hear the wind whistling through the terracotta tiles on the roof above her, a gentle, rhythmic creaking that has lulled her to sleep for years. She stirs now. There is no alarm clock here, no digital beep to shatter the peace. Instead, she is woken by the city itself. Rome is famous for being noisy. The poet Martial often complained that a man could get no sleep in the city due to the coppersmiths banging their hammers and the schoolteachers shouting at their students in the morning. But right now, in this delicate hour before true dawn, the noise is different. It is the sound of distant carts rumbling out of the city gates. As the law forbids heavy transport wagons within the walls during the daylight hours to prevent gridlock, the fading rumble of wooden wheels on stone is her signal that the night is officially over. Lucia pushes back the heavy woolen blanket. The air in the room is brisk. Rome can be surprisingly chilly in the early morning, especially here in the shadows of the hills where the stone buildings trap the night's cold. She sits up, rubbing warmth into her arms, her breath puffing out in a small, white cloud that vanishes almost as soon as it appears. The room is small, barely 10 feet across, with plaster walls that were once painted a cheerful yellow but have since faded to the color of old parchment. There is a small niche in the wall, a household shrine or lararium, where a tiny, roughly carved figurine of a protective spirit watches over the apartment. It is a humble space, but it is hers. She steps onto the floor. It is concrete, mixed with bits of crushed brick, a standard flooring for the working class, known as Opus 6. It is durable, waterproof, and currently very cold against her bare feet. She moves quietly, out of habit. The walls of Roman apartments are notoriously thin, remarkably so. If she were to drop her clay water cup, the family sleeping below her and the baker sleeping next door would likely both wake up with a start. There is a bit of a historical debate regarding just how crowded these buildings actually were. Some scholars argue that Rome had a population of over 1 million people, packed into a city area not much larger than a modern university campus, while others suggest the number was closer to 500,000. If you were to ask Lucia, listening to the muffled snores of her neighbor through the thin plaster, She would likely tell you that it feels like there are at least 2 million people, and all of them are living in this stairwell. She reaches for a basin of water sitting on a small wooden stool. It was drawn from the public fountain the night before, and a thin film of dust has settled on the surface. She splashes her face, the shock of the cold water chasing away the last lingering dreams. It is a simple act, one we all know. That moment of splashing water on the face to tell the body that rest is over and duty begins. Next comes the cleaning of the teeth. This is always a fascinating part of ancient hygiene. Without modern toothpaste, the Romans are quite creative. Lucia uses a small stick with a frayed end, dipping it into a mixture of crushed oyster shells and charcoal. It sounds gritty, and frankly, it is, but it scrubs the teeth remarkably well, and the charcoal helps to sweeten the breath. It is a small daily ritual, staring into a polished bronze disc that serves as a mirror, checking her reflection in the dim grey light filtering through the window shutters. She dresses quickly. Her clothes are practical, designed for hard work. She pulls on a tunica, a simple T-shaped garment made of undyed wool that falls to her knees. It is durable, warm, and easy to move in, which is essential for the physical labor awaiting her at the laundry. Over this, she ties a simple rope belt, cinching the fabric at the waist to keep it out of her way. There are no zippers, no Velcro, no elastic. Just fabric, knots, and gravity holding everything together. She moves to the window and unlatches the wooden shutters. They swing open with a dry groan of wood on wood dot. The view from the 4th floor is spectacular in its own chaotic way. Below her, the narrow alleyway is still deep in shadow, a canyon of grey and brown. But looking up, she can see the dawn arriving. The sky has shifted from purple to a soft, milky blue, streaked with veins of pink gold where the sun is pushing against the horizon. Across the way, the terracotta rooftops of the neighboring insulae are starting to catch the light. They glow a warm, rusty orange, a sea of clay tiles stretching out towards the forum. Smoke is beginning to rise from hundreds of chimneys and braziers as the city wakes up to cook breakfast. It drifts in lazy, grey ribbons, smelling of oak and olive wood, mixing with the scent of baking bread from the commercial ovens down the street. Lucia takes a moment here, just a heartbeat of stillness. It is her favorite part of the day. The city is poised on the edge of its usual frenzy, but for now, it is just light touching stone. She can see a few birds, perhaps swallows, darting between the rooftops. Catching the updrafts, she turns back to the room, grabbing a small piece of bread left over from yesterday's supper. It is dense and chewy, made from emmer wheat, but it settles the stomach. She wraps a heavier woolen cloak, a palla, around her shoulders. The morning air outside will be even colder than the apartment. Before she leaves, she glances once more at the little shrine in the niche. She touches her fingers to her lips and then to the figurine, a silent request for a good day, or perhaps just a day without injury or anger. The gods of Rome are everywhere. In the great temples on the hills, yes, but also here, in the corner of a cramped apartment, watching over a laundry worker as she starts her shift. She opens the door to the hallway. The stairwell is dark and smells faintly of garlic and old timber. She begins the descent. Down the steep wooden stairs that creak under her sandals. 1 flight, 2 flights. The sounds of the building get louder as she descends, a baby crying on the 3rd floor. A dog barking on the 2nd dot. By the time she reaches the ground floor, the heavy wooden door to the street is already unbarred. She pushes it open and steps out. The transition is immediate. The air is fresher here, moving through the alleyway. The light is dimmer, blocked by the tall buildings, but the energy is different. She is no longer in the private, quiet world of sleep. She is now standing on the stones of Rome. The city is waking up, and Lucia is waking up with it. She adjusts her cloak, takes a deep breath of the cool morning air, and begins to walk. Lucia steps onto the roadway, her leather sandals making a soft slap-slap sound against the hard volcanic rock. The street here is paved with large, polygonal blocks of basalt, fitted together so tightly that you could barely slip a knife blade between them. These stones have been polished smooth by generations of feet and wagon wheels, gleaming slightly in the damp morning air like the scales of a great grey sleeping beast. She is walking through the Suburra, the beating heart of working-class Rome, to the wealthy elite living up on the breezy hills. This valley is a place of noise and chaos, a dangerous maze to be avoided. But for Lucia, this is simply home. It is a neighborhood of immense vitality, where life spills out of the doorways and onto the pavement. The street is narrow, barely wide enough for two loaded carts to pass each other, and it twists and turns without much logic, following the ancient contours of the valley floor. High above her, the upper stories of the apartment buildings nearly touch, leaning in toward one another like gossiping giants. They block out much of the sky, creating a perpetual twilight in the alley below. Even as the sun climbs higher, as she walks, she has to navigate the unique obstacle course of a Roman street. The road surface is not flat like a modern highway. It dips in the center to form a gutter for rain and, well, for everything else that washes down from the city, to cross from one side to the other without ruining her shoes. She uses the stepping stones, large, raised blocks placed at intervals across the road. These stones are a clever piece of urban design. They are spaced just wide enough for the wheels of a standard cart to pass through the gaps, but close enough for a pedestrian to hop from one to the next. Lucia knows this dance well. She steps lightly 1, 2, 3, hopping over a trickle of murky water making its way toward the main sewer, the Cloaca Maxima. The city is becoming busier with every minute. She passes a Pepina, a small street-side bar that is just opening its shutters. A warm, yeasty smell wafts out, mixing with the scent of wood. Inside, she can see the flicker of a fire and hear the clinking of ceramic cups. A few men are already leaning against the L-shaped stone counter, blowing steam off cups of watered wine and grabbing a quick breakfast. It is a common misconception that ancient families sat down to large breakfasts together. In reality, for the working people of Rome, breakfast is an on-the-go affair. Most people in the insulae do not have kitchens. Fire is a terrifying risk in these crowded wooden structures, so they rely on these street vendors for sustenance. Lucia smells the savory aroma of fried chickpeas and sausages, a very popular street snack, but she keeps walking. Historians still argue whether Rome had strict rich and poor zones, or if the city was a vertical gradient where the wealthy lived on the spacious ground floors and the poor lived above them in the same buildings. Walking through the Suburra, it feels like a blend. She passes a doorway flanked by elegant Corinthian columns, clearly the entrance to a wealthy merchant's house, right next to a cramped workshop repairing shoes. The marble of the rich and the timber of the poor sit shoulder to shoulder here, united by the dust of the street. Suddenly, a loud rumble shakes the ground beneath her feet. Lucia steps quickly to the side, pressing her back against the rough plaster wall of a bakery. A massive ox-drawn wagon comes trundling down the alley, the driver shouting and cracking a whip in the air not to hit the animals, but to signal his presence. The wagon is piled high with timber, likely destined for one of the Emperor's new building projects near the Forum. The driver looks stressed, and for good reason. He is racing against the sun. Rome has a very specific traffic law, the Lex Iulia Municipalis, which bans heavy transport wagons from the streets during the first 10 hours of the day. This is to prevent the city from becoming completely gridlocked by commerce. The drivers have been working all night, hauling goods into the city under the cover of darkness, and now they must clear out before the ban comes into effect at sunrise. It creates a strange, frantic rush hour in reverse, as the heavy trucks try to leave just as the pedestrians are trying to arrive. Lucia watches the heavy wooden wheels grind past, the iron rims sparking against the basalt. The oxen are huge, their breath steaming in the cool air, their heads lowered as they pull against the yoke. Once the wagon passes, the street feels suddenly spacious again, filled only with the murmur of voices and the scratching of a stray dog looking for scraps. She continues her journey, turning a corner past a public fountain. The water flows continuously from a bronze spout shaped like a lion's head, splashing into a stone basin. The sound is incredibly soothing, a constant, gentle rushing that underpins the soundtrack of the city. A young girl is there filling a heavy clay jar, and they exchange a sleepy nod. On the wall next to the fountain, someone has scratched a message into the plaster. Rome is a city covered in graffiti. It is the social media of the ancient world. This one is simple, a caricature of a man with a large nose and the text Samius to Cornelius, "Go hang yourself." Lucia ignores it. She has seen far worse and far funnier, scratched onto the walls of her own building. As she moves deeper into the city, the texture of the crowd changes. She sees slaves in simple tunics, carrying baskets, soldiers in red cloaks looking bored at a checkpoint, and the occasional wealthy citizen carried in a litter-curtained box on poles, borne on the shoulders of 4 sturdy men. The passenger inside is invisible, hidden behind silk curtains, floating above the muck of the street like a deity. Lucia keeps her head down, weaving through the gaps in the crowd with the practiced ease of a local. She knows which loose stone to avoid, which alleyway smells too strongly of refuse, and which dog is friendly. She is approaching the district of the Falons the Fullers and laundry workers. You can always tell when you are getting close, not by the sights, but by the smell. The aroma of frying sausages and baking bread begins to fade, replaced by something sharper, something acrid and chemical. It is the smell of industry, of sulfur and alkali. To a modern nose, it might be unpleasant, a sharp tang that sits at the back of the throat. But to Lucia, it smells like work. It smells like the wages that pay for her room and her bread. It is the scent of the city cleaning itself. She turns down a wider avenue, lined with workshops. The sun has finally cleared the rooftops now, sending shafts of bright golden light down into the street, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The shadows retreat, revealing the vibrant colors of the city, the red brick, the white limestone, the painted signs above the shop doors. The noise of the city swells around her rhythmic, dull roar of thousands of people beginning their day. But within that roar, she can hear the specific sounds of her trade, the splashing of water, the rhythmic thumping of feet on fabric, and the creaking of wooden presses. She stops in front of a wide opening in a building facade. Above the door, a painted fresco shows angels or, rather, winged cupids happily stomping on clothes in a tub. It is a whimsical advertisement for a grueling job. Lucia pauses for a moment on the threshold. She adjusts the rope belt at her waist and smooths her hair. The walk is over. The commute, with all its hazards and life, is done. She takes a breath, inhaling that sharp, familiar air, and steps out of the sunlight and into the cool, damp shade of the workshop. Lucia moves deeper into the workshop, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer light of the interior. The Phalonica is a space that feels both domestic and industrial, a strange hybrid that is typical of Roman businesses. In a former life, centuries ago, or perhaps just a few decades, this building was a grand private house. You can still see the ghost of its elegance in the architecture. Lucia walks through what used to be the atrium, the formal entrance hall where a wealthy family would once have greeted their guests. Now, however, the space has been repurposed for utility. The beautiful mosaic floor, once depicting scenes of sea gods and dolphins, is worn smooth and partially covered by wooden pallets to protect it from the heavy foot traffic of the workers. The impluvium, the shallow square pool in the center of the room designed to catch rainwater from the roof, opening above, is no longer a decorative feature. It has been converted into a massive holding tank, brimming with water that reflects the square patch of morning sky overhead. The air here is cool and still, held within the thick concrete and brick walls. It is a relief from the sensory overload of the street outside. Here, the world is ordered. There is a place for everything. Along the walls, where statues of ancestors might once have stood, there are now rows of wooden shelving units, stacked high with neatly folded garments waiting to be collected. Sitting at a small wooden desk near the entrance is Gaius. He is the manager of this operation, a freedman with a bald head that shines in the shaft of light falling from the roof opening. He is bent over a wax tablet, scratching notes with a stylus, the soft scritch-scritch sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. He does not look up as Lucia enters, merely raising a hand in a distracted wave. He is already deep in the mathematics of the day-tallying the tunics brought in yesterday, calculating the cost of the fuller's earth needed for the week, and keeping track of which wealthy patron owes them money. Lucia walks past him, heading toward the back of the building. This is the transition zone, the boundary between the public face of the shop where the finished, snowy white togas are presented to customers and the messy, wet reality of the work itself. She enters the rear courtyard, the peristyle. In a normal home, this would be a garden with rose bushes and a fountain. Here the columns still stand, supporting the roof of the portico, but the garden has been dug up and replaced with the tools of the trade. It is a landscape of tubs, vats, and drying racks. Two of her colleagues are already there. There is Felix, a man of immense strength with shoulders that seem carved from oak, who is currently hauling a sack of sulfur ash into the corner. And there is Sabina, a younger woman who is busy unstacking the wooden buckets they will need for the rinsing process. "Good morning," Lucia whispers, her voice soft in the quiet space. "Morning," Felix grunts, offering a tired but genuine smile. "The water pressure is good today. The aqueduct must be running full." Lucia nods, untying her heavy wool cloak and folding it carefully. She places it on a shelf in a small alcove that serves as their changing area. This is a vital part of the morning ritual. You cannot wash the city's clothes while wearing your own streetwear. The work they do is wet, messy, and physically demanding. She slips off her sandals, placing them next to her cloak. The stone floor is cold against her bare feet, a sensation that grounds her. She removes her outer tunic, revealing a simpler, shorter undertunic, a subligaculum, which is essentially a loincloth and a band of fabric around the chest. It is the uniform of the fuller practical, sparse, and easy to wash at the end of the day, as she ties her hair back with a strip of linen, keeping it high and tight to prevent it from trailing in the water. She looks around the workshop with a critical eye. It is a marvel of specialized equipment. Historians often debate the social standing of people like Lucia and Gaius for a long time. The assumption was that because fulling involved urine and hard labor, fullers were social pariahs, pushed to the margins of polite society. But newer evidence suggests something quite different. The fulleries were often located in prime real estate, right on the main streets. They were lucrative, essential businesses. The Romans were obsessed with cleanliness and the whiteness of their togas. To keep a toga white in a dusty, smoky city required professional help. Therefore, the people who could provide that service were not outcasts. They were vital cogs in the social machine, respected for their skill, even if their workplace had a distinct aroma. Lucia moves to the equipment preparation area. She picks up a large clay pot, checking its contents. It is full of Simoleon earth, a type of fine white clay imported from the island of Comolas. This is their secret weapon, a natural degreaser that they will use later to scrub the fabric. She runs the fine powdery dust between her thumb and forefinger, checking for grit. It is smooth as flour, good if there were grit in the clay. It could tear the delicate wool of a senator's toga, and that would be a disaster that no amount of apologies could fix. Next, she checks the hedgehog skins. It sounds like a joke, but it is a serious tool. Hanging on a peg are several dried skins of hedgehogs, their spines stiff and sharp. They are used for carding the wool, brushing it to raise the nap after washing. It is a quirky, somewhat fringe detail of the trade while metal combs existed. The natural, hooked spines of the hedgehog were considered superior for finishing high-quality cloth, a practice that would persist in various forms for centuries. Lucia takes down one of the skins, inspecting it to ensure the spines are not broken. It is a strange object, ancient and organic, a reminder that for all their stone aqueducts and paved roads, the Romans are still deeply connected to the natural world and its resources. Everything seems to be in order. The vats are scrubbed clean from yesterday. The drying racks, large wicker frames shaped like bells, are stacked neatly against the wall. The fires under the large heating cauldron have been lit by the night watchman and are crackling softly, beginning to warm the water that they will mix with the cleaning agents. There is a sense of calm anticipation in the air. The team moves around each other with a practiced, silent choreography. They don't need to speak much. They know the rhythm. Felix is checking the drainage channels, clearing out a few fallen leaves that might block the flow. Sabina is arranging the sorting table. Lucia walks over to the large intake bins near the entrance of the courtyard. This is where the challenge begins. Piled high in wicker baskets are the clothes that were dropped off late yesterday afternoon. It is a mountain of dirty laundry-white togas turned grey by dust, colourful tunics stained with wine and sweat, heavy cloaks smelling of horse and rain. She runs a hand over the top of the pile. The fabric is cool and damp. Hidden in this heap are the stories of the city's previous day, the spilled wine of a banquet, the mud of a construction site, the sweat of a politician running for office. She takes a deep breath, centering herself. The quiet time is ending. The sun is climbing higher, and soon the heat will build, and the hard physical labor of the stomp and scrub will begin. But for now, in these last few moments of preparation, there is peace. The workshop is ready. The tools are waiting. The water is warming. Lucia turns to Felix and Sabina. She gives a small nod. It is time to open the bins. It is time to start the day. Lucia steps up to the large sorting table, a sturdy slab of oak polished smooth by years of sliding fabric. Sabina joins her on the other side, and together they begin the morning's triage. This is a critical stage of the process, perhaps the most intellectual part of the job before the brute physical labor begins. In a modern world, we might absent-mindedly toss everything into a machine and press a button, hoping for the best. But here, every garment is an individual patient requiring a specific diagnosis. They start with the togas. To the untrained eye, a pile of Roman laundry might look like a sea of generic white sheets. But to Lucia, it is a complex landscape of varying weaves, weights, and qualities. She reaches for the first bundle, grabbing the heavy wool with both hands to heave it. Onto the table, it is worth pausing to appreciate the sheer physical reality of the Roman toga. It is not, as it often appears in movies, a simple bedsheet casually draped over the shoulder. It is a massive, semicircular piece of woolen cloth, often measuring up to 18 feet across. It is heavy, cumbersome, and incredibly hot. When Lucia unfolds it, the wool cascades over the edges of the table, pooling on the floor like a creamy drift of snow. This particular toga belongs to a magistrate. She can tell by the pretext, the broad purple stripe woven into the border. The purple dye, derived from thousands of crushed sea snails, is stiff and precious. It requires gentle handling. If she scrubs that stripe too hard, the color will bleed or fade, and the workshop would likely be sued for the cost of the garment, which could easily equal a year of Lucia's wages. Oil here, Sabina murmurs, pointing to a dark, translucent patch near the chest area of the garment. Lucia leans in. She sniffs the fabric lightly. It smells of olives and herbs. Likely from lunch, she agrees. He must have dropped a piece of bread dipped in oil. Oil is the enemy. Water alone will not touch it. In fact, water will only lock it in further if they aren't careful. This stain will need the special treatment, pre-soak in a concentrated alkali solution before it ever touches the main vat. Lucia marks the spot by tying a small knot in the fabric near the stain, a simple code that tells the washers down the line to pay attention. They move on to the next item, a tunic made of finer, softer wool. This one is stained with red splatter. It looks alarming, but Lucia knows immediately what it is. Wine, she whispers, and cheap wine at that. The smell is acidic. This is a common stain in Rome, a city that runs on wine. From the morning meal to the late-night banquets, wine is the staple drink, diluted with water for hydration. There is a fascinating, somewhat quirky tidbit about how Romans view these stains. While we might see a wine stain as just a mess in Roman social circles, the type of stain can sometimes be a status symbol or a badge of shame. A stain from a rare, imported vintage on a banquet couch cover implies you were at a fabulous party. A stain from cheap, watered-down street wine on a tunic suggests you were loitering in a tavern. The laundry workers, in a way, are the secret keepers of the city's social habits. They know who is eating well, who is drinking too much, and who has been walking through the muddy construction zones of the Campus Martis. Lucia separates. The the wine-stained tunic into a different pile. These will need a treatment with sulfur fumes later to bleach out the color as they work. Sorting the heavy woolens from the lighter linens, they come across a garment that is simply grey with dust. It is the dust of the Forum, the fine, pulverized debris of a city built of brick and marble. This is the most common stain of all. Historians still debate the extent to which the average Roman citizen wore the cumbersome toga in daily life. For a long time, the assumption was that everyone walked around looking like a marble statue. But many scholars now argue that the toga was actually the ancient equivalent of a tuxedo worn only for formal business, religious rituals, or by the upper classes who didn't have to do manual labor. The average person on the street likely wore a simple tunic and cloak. The fact that Lucia's workshop is filled with so many togas suggests that their clientele is exclusively the elite. The men who have to stand in the Senate or the law courts and look the part of the dignified. Roman citizen. Lucia unfolds a smaller garment, a child's tunic. It is stained green at the knees and hem. Grass stains. She smiles faintly. Some things do not change. Even in the capital of the greatest empire on earth, children still fall down in the grass. This stain is organic, simple. It will wash out easily with a bit of fuller's earth and water. She tosses it into the light wash basket. The work is rhythmic. Grab, inspect, smell, sort. Grab, inspect, smell, sort. The piles around them grow. There is the white pile for the bleaching room, the colored pile for gentle washing, mostly russets, greens and browns. The Romans love color, despite the white marble image we have of them. And then there is the heavily soiled pile, the garments that will need the most aggressive chemical treatment. Occasionally they find surprises. A bronze coin left in the fold of a sash, a dried flower petal caught in a hem, a small scrap of papyrus with a shopping list. These items are carefully removed and placed in a small lost and found bowl on the manager's desk. Though, in truth, the coin often finds its way into the tip jar for the workers' evening meal. Sabina holds up a heavy cloak, a piennula made of thick, felted wool. It is waterproof, designed for travel. It is caked with a thick, reddish mud. Clay, Sabina says, rubbing the dry dirt between her fingers. From the riverbanks, maybe, or the brickyards, Lucia suggests. It's sticky. We'll need to scrape that dry before we wet it. If they wet the clay while it is still thick, it will turn into a slurry that sinks deep into the fibers, staining the wool permanently. They have to let it dry completely and then beat the dust out first. It is a counterintuitive part of cleaning sometimes. You have to make things duster before you can make them cleaner. They place the cloak on a separate rack for brushing. The air in the sorting area is filled with the smell of unwashed humanities, perfume, food, and road dust. It is not a pleasant smell, but it is a familiar one. It is the smell of life. Lucia doesn't mind it. There is a satisfaction in taking this chaos, this tangible evidence of the city's machinaces, and knowing that by the end of the day, she will have restored it to purity and order. She picks up the last item in the first basket. It is a lady stola, a long dress worn by married women. It is made of fine, almost sheer wool, dyed a soft saffron yellow. It is delicate, beautiful. There is a small stain near the shoulder. Makeup, lead white and ochre rouge. The cosmetics of a Roman matron, Lucia handles it gently. This fabric cannot take the rough pounding of the foot tubs. It will have to be washed by hand in a small basin, squeezed gently like a sponge. She places it on top of the most delicate pile, like a cherry on a cake. The first round of sorting is done. The mountain of laundry has been conquered and divided into manageable hills. Lucia wipes her hands on a rag hanging from her belt. Her fingertips feel dry from touching the dusty wall. She looks at Sabina. Ready for the mix. Sabina nods. Ready? They leave the sorting table and the dry, dusty world of dirty clothes. They turn towards the vats, where the water is waiting, and where the true alchemy of the Phalonica is about to begin. The diagnosis is complete. Now the surgery starts. Lucia and Sabina move away from the dry warmth of the sorting table and deeper into the workshop, approaching a row of large earthenware jars lined up against the cool stone wall. We have now arrived at the most infamous, yet scientifically brilliant, aspect of the Roman laundry process. If you were standing there with Lucia, you would smell it before you saw it. It is a sharp, stinging scent that prickles the nose and brings water to the eyes, the unmistakable aroma of ammonia to a modern sensibility. Accustomed to floral-scented detergents and bright blue synthetic liquids, what happens next might seem repulsive. But we must strip away our modern prejudices and look at this through the eyes of a Roman to Lucia. The liquid inside these jars is not waste. It is a resource. It is the chemical engine that drives the entire industry. It is, quite literally, the bleach of the ancient world. The jars contain urine. Stale, fermented human urine. Lucia approaches the first jar, a massive terracotta vessel known as a dolium, half buried in the ground to keep the contents cool and stable. She removes the heavy wooden lid, and the fumes waft up, invisible but potent. She doesn't flinch. In fact, she leans in slightly, wafting the air toward her nose with a practiced hand, much like a sommelier checking the bouquet of a vintage wine. She is checking for potency. She needs to know if the fermentation process is complete. Here is the science behind the smell. Fresh urine is not particularly useful for cleaning, but if you let it sit for a few days, the urea in the liquid breaks down into ammonia. Ammonia is a powerful alkaline base. Why does this matter? Because dirt and grease on clothing are slightly acidic. When the high pH ammonia meets the grease and oil trapped in the toga fibers, a chemical reaction occurs. It neutralizes the acids and breaks down the fats, turning them into a kind of soluble soap that can be easily washed away with water. It is basic chemistry, discovered not in a lab, but through centuries of trial and error. Lucia dips a long-handled ladle into the dolium. The liquid is a clear, dark amber. She nods to Sabina. This batch is ready. It's strong. The logistics of acquiring this precious fluid are a fascinating glimpse into the Roman economy. The Phalonica cannot generate enough of this supply on its own. They need to import it. Rome, ever the pragmatic city, has turned this biological necessity into a structured utility. Large clay pots are placed on street corners throughout the city, serving as public urinals for passing men. When these pots are full, employees from the fulleries or, perhaps independent contractors, the honey dippers of antiquity come with carts to collect the liquid and transport it to the workshops. It is a perfect recycling loop. The city stays somewhat cleaner because men aren't relieving themselves on the walls, and the laundry industry gets the raw materials it needs. This system is so profitable that it even attracted the attention of the imperial treasury. There is a famous story about the Emperor Vespasian, who ruled a few decades before Lucia's time. He was a practical, no-nonsense soldier emperor who needed to fill the state coffers after a civil war. He instituted a tax on the collection of urine from these public pots. When his son, Titus, complained that taxing such a substance was undignified and disgusting, Vespasian famously held up a gold coin collected from the tax and asked his son if it smelled. When Titus said no, Vespasian replied, "Pecunia non alet money, does not stink." Lucia carefully pours the amber liquid into a smaller mixing bucket. She works with respect. This liquid costs money. The tax is passed down to the laundry owners, so every drop wasted is profit lost. She then turns to another container, this one filled with a fine, grey-white powder. This is Creta Felonia, or fuller's earth. It is a type of clay rich in magnesium and aluminum. If the urine is the chemical solvent, the fuller's earth is the physical scrubber. It acts like a sponge, absorbing the grease that the ammonia loosens. It also adds a gentle, abrasive quality, helping to scour the dirt from the heavy wool without damaging the fibers. Historians still argue whether fullers used a standard recipe for their mixture or if every workshop had its own proprietary blend. Some evidence suggests that different stains required different ratios, more ammonia for grease, more clay for whitening. It is likely that Lucia is working by feel and experience rather than a written formula, adjusting the mix based on the heaviness of the load. They sorted earlier. She scoops a generous amount of the clay into the bucket of urine. It lands with a soft plop, sending up a puff of dust. She takes a wooden paddle and begins to stir. The mixture turns into a thick, slurry-like paste. It bubbles slightly as the air escapes the dry clay. The color shifts to a murky, pale beige. It doesn't look like much yet. Certainly doesn't look like a cleansing agent to our eyes, but this sludge is the most effective degreaser available to mankind until the invention of modern synthetic solvents. Lucia pauses to wipe a stray lock of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist, careful not to touch her face with her working hands. The fumes are strong today, filling the small prep area with a heavy, sharp atmosphere. It clears the sinuses instantly. There is a strange, quiet beauty in this moment. We often think of the Romans as masters of stone and iron, of aqueducts and swords. But here, in the dim light of the workshop, we see their mastery of chemistry. They took the waste of the body and the dust of the earth and combined them to create purity. They understood that, to make something truly white, you sometimes have to use materials that are dark and pungent. Sabina brings over a large amphora of water, fresh from the aqueduct pipe. Lucia nods, and Sabina pours it into the slurry, thinning it out until it reaches the consistency of a soup. This is the wash liquor. It is ready. They lift the bucket between them. It is heavy, sloshing against the sides. They carry it out of the prep room and back into the main courtyard, where the treading tubs await. The sun has moved higher now, cutting across the peristyle and lighting up the steam rising from the heating cauldrons. The smell of the ammonia mixture follows them, trailing through the air. To a passerby on the street, it might wrinkle the nose. But to Lucia, it is just another tool, as neutral and necessary as a hammer is to a carpenter. She sets the bucket down next to the first tub, the liquid settling into a calm, reflective surface. The soap is ready. The clothes are sorted. The water is warm. The preparation is over. Now the hardest part of the day begins. Lucia stretches her back, feeling the vertebrae pop, and prepares to step into the mix. Lucia steps up to the washing stall, a small, waist-high cubicle built of brick and covered in waterproof stucco. It looks remarkably like a very narrow, solitary shower booth. There are 3 of these stalls lined up against the wall of the peristyle, known as the Saltis Philonicus, the fuller's dance floor. She hikes her tunic up even higher, tucking the hem securely into her belt to keep it dry. With a practiced motion, she grips the low walls on either side of the stall and swings her legs over the edge. Lowering herself into the tub, her feet sink into the pile of dirty clothes. The sensation is distinct and, frankly, one that would make most modern people shudder. The fabric is slimy with the mixture of clay, ammonia, and water. It is warm, almost hot, heated by the morning sun and the chemical reaction of the cleaning agents. The slurry squelches up between her toes, thick and gritty. But Lucia does not shudder. To her, this is simply the texture of the day. It is the feeling of productivity. Sabina climbs into the stall next to her, and Felix takes the third. They settle in, finding their footing on the uneven terrain of bundled togas and tunics. Ready? Felix asks, his voice echoing slightly off the stucco walls. Ready, Lucia replies, and then the dance begins. It is not a chaotic stomping. It is a precise, rhythmic movement that has been refined over centuries. Lucia grips the tops of the stall walls with her hands to support her weight, turning her body into a human tripod. This allows her to lift her knees high, driving her feet down with calculated force, but without losing her balance or exhausting her core too quickly. Squish, splash, splash. The sound is rhythmic, almost musical. It is the heartbeat of the Philonica. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. She works the fabric systematically, pressing the warm, soapy sludge deep into the weave of the wool. This action does 2 things simultaneously. First, the mechanical agitation forces the dirt and grease out of the fibers, allowing the clay and ammonia to capture it. Second, and perhaps more importantly for the quality of the cloth, the stomping fulls the wool. Fulling is the process of thickening the fabric. The heat, moisture, and pressure cause the microscopic scales on the wool fibers to open up and interlock with one another. This shrinks the cloth slightly, but makes it denser, softer, and more durable. A well-fulled toga is windproof and waterproof, a garment of armor against the elements. Lucia is not just cleaning the clothes. She is essentially manufacturing the final texture of the textile. The rhythm takes over. It is a trance-like state. Once the body learns the motion, the mind is free to wander. Lucia stares at the peeling paint on the opposite wall, but her thoughts drift. She thinks about the bread she will buy for dinner, about the gossip she heard at the fountain, about the way the light catches, the steam rising from the stalls. There is a fascinating scholarly debate surrounding exactly who was doing this dancing. For years, historians looked at the famous frescoes from Pompeii, specifically from the Philonica of Stephanus, which depict men and young boys in the treading tubs. This led to the assumption that this physically demanding part of the job was reserved for males. However, literary sources and other artwork suggest that women like Lucia were very much present in the tubs. In a society where labor was life, the idea of men's work versus women's work often dissolved in the face of economic necessity. If you had strong legs and could keep a beat, you were hired to keep the rhythm steady. Felix starts to hum. It is a low, rumbling tune, a popular song from the amphitheater about a gladiator who won his freedom. Lucia joins in on the chorus, her voice blending with Sabina's. Singing is essential. It coordinates their movements. ensuring they are all working at the same pace. It turns the drudgery into a collective ritual. Down, twist, lift. Down, twist, lift. The physical exertion is intense. It is the ancient equivalent of a high-intensity step aerobics class, performed in a sauna for 10 hours a day. Lucia can feel the sweat trickling down her back, soaking her under. Her calves burn with a familiar, dull ache. Her quadriceps tighten with every lift. The Romans, who loved to categorize everything, actually had a specific name for the step used by fullers, the saltus. It was distinct enough that it became a recognizable move in comedic plays. Actors would mimic the high-knee stomping gait of the fuller to get a cheap laugh from the crowd. Lucia knows this, and it doesn't bother her. Let them laugh. She has the strongest legs in the neighborhood. As she stomps, she feels a hard lump under her left heel. She pauses the rhythm for a microsecond, shifting her foot. It is the knot she tied earlier in the magistrate's Togas, one with the oil stain. Her feet are her eyes down here in the murk. She can feel the texture of the knot, reminding her to give this section extra attention. She shifts her weight, grinding her heel into that specific patch of fabric, working the clay into the stubborn olive oil dot. The air in the courtyard grows humid. The steam rising from the warm tubs mixes with the cool morning air, creating a localized fog bank that hangs over the workers. Through the mist, Lucia sees Gaius, the manager, walking past. He nods at them, checking the time on the sundial mounted on the wall. "Keep the pace," he calls out, though his voice is not unkind. The sun is moving. They pick up the tempo. The liquid in the tub is turning a darker color now, a murky grey-brown as the dirt is released from the clothes. It is satisfying to see. The whiter the foam on top becomes, the dirtier the water below gets. It is a visual confirmation that the chemistry is working. Occasionally, a splash of the ammonia mixture flies up and hits Lucia's leg. It stings slightly, a reminder of the potency of the liquid. She ignores it. Her skin has grown tough over the years, accustomed to the harsh environment. There is a saying among fullers that the ammonia cures everything from warts to gout. Whether that is true or just a story they tell themselves to feel better about standing in urine all day is up for debate. There is a strange intimacy in this work. Lucia is intimately acquainted with the clothes of strangers. She knows the shape of the senator's shoulders by the way his toga has stretched. She knows the stride of the soldier by the wear on his tunic's hem. She is washing away the physical evidence of their lives, resetting them to a blank slate for tomorrow. The cycle for this batch is nearing its end. The fabric feels different under her feet, now heavier, softer, more pliable. The stiffness of the dirt is gone. "Halt!" Felix calls out. The rhythm stops. The silence that rushes back into the courtyard is sudden and loud. The splashing ceases. The three workers stand panting in their stalls, chests heaving, sweat dripping from their noses. Lucia leans forward, resting her forehead against the cool plaster of the wall for a moment. Her legs are trembling slightly, a vibrating hum of muscle fatigue. It is a good kind of tired, the feeling of a machine that has functioned perfectly. She looks down into the tub. The clothes are submerged in a dark, opaque soup. They look ruined, stained beyond repair by the cleaning fluid itself. But Lucia knows better. This is the darkness before the dawn. The dirt is loose, suspended in the slurry, just waiting to be washed away. "Drain it," she says, her voice husky from the exertion. She reaches down and pulls the wooden plug at the bottom of the stall. With a loud, sucking gurgle, the foul liquid begins to swirl away, disappearing into the lead pipes that feed into the city's sewer system. The heavy, wet mounds of fabric are left behind. Slumped on the floor of the tub like exhausted ghosts, Lucia takes a deep breath of fresh air, wiping her face with her arm. The dance is done for this round. Now comes the purification. The silence that follows the draining of the vats is short-lived. It is replaced almost immediately by the sound of wet, heavy movement. The fabric at the bottom of the treading stall is now a sodden mass, saturated with the cleaning slurry. If you have ever tried to lift a wet wool blanket out of a washing machine, you know the deceptive weight of waterlogged fabric. Now, imagine that blanket is 18 feet long and weighs as much as a small person. Lucia bends her knees, bracing her core. She grabs a handful of the wet toga, her fingers sinking into the dense, slippery wool. On 3, Felix grunts from the next stall. 1, 2, 3. With a collective exhale of effort, they hoist the bundles up and over the low walls of the stalls, dropping them into large wicker baskets waiting on the tiled floor. Thud, splat. The sound is heavy and wet. The baskets groan under the weight. They step out of the stalls, their legs streaked with grey foam. A quick splash from a bucket cleans their skin, the cold water chasing away the warmth of the chemical reaction. Now begins the transfer. They drag the heavy baskets across the courtyard to the rinsing tanks, a series of 3 large, rectangular basins made of stone and lined with waterproof cement. This is where the magic of Roman engineering enters the workshop. While the treading tubs were a closed loop of recycled chemicals, the rinsing tanks are part of a glorious living system. A lead pipe, bursting from the wall like a silver artery, pours a constant, thundering stream of fresh water into the first tank. The water comes straight from the Aqua Marcia, one of Rome's greatest aqueducts. It has travelled over 50 miles from the cool limestone springs of the Annual Valley, marching across the countryside on stone arches, tunnelling through mountains, and diving into siphons just to end up here, splashing into a tank in a laundry shop. Lucia pauses for a second to admire the flow. The water is crystal clear and shockingly cold. The Emperor Augustus once boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. But his right-hand man, Agrippa, arguably did something more important. He made Rome a city of water. Historians estimate that by this time, the aqueducts are pouring roughly 1 billion litres of water into the city every single day. It is an obscene abundance, a display of power that allows even a humble workshop to have running water, that rivals a modern factory. Lucia and Felix tip the baskets, sliding the slimy grey-brown garments into the first tank. The water immediately clouds up, the dirt and ammonia swirling away in the current. They roll up their sleeves and lean over the edge of the basin. This part of the job is less about brute force and more about patience. They grab the fabric, swishing it back and forth in the current, mimicking the flow of a river. The goal is to flush out every trace of the urine and clay. If any ammonia is left in the wool, it will irritate the skin of the wearer and smell terrible once it warms up in the sun. A senator smelling of stale. Laundry is a political disaster waiting to happen. The water in the tanks is arranged in a cascade system. Fresh water flows into the top tank, then spills over a weir into the middle tank, and finally into the bottom tank. They start the clothes in the bottom tank, the dirtiest clean water, and work them upstream. It is a countercurrent exchange system, a principle still used in modern chemical engineering. As Lucia works the toga in the middle tank, the water numbs her hands. It is brisk, biting cold, but it feels clean. The smell of ammonia fades, replaced by the scent of wet stone and mountain rain. There is a small bronze nozzle fitted to the end of the inlet pipe, stamped with the imperial seal. This is the calyx, a standardized measure. It ensures that the workshop cannot take more water than it pays for. The size of the hole determines the tax. It is a source of constant low-level anxiety for shop owners. Inspectors from the Water Commissioner's office, the Equerry, are known to drop in unannounced to check if anyone has widened the hole to steal extra flow. Gaius, the manager, is scrupulous about this. He knows that stealing water is a crime against the emperor himself. Lucia pulls the toga from the middle tank and heaves it into the top tank, the pristine, potable water. Here, the fabric floats like a cloud. She pushes it down, watching the bubbles rise. Scholars have long debated the water quality in these workshops. Some argue that because lead pipes were used, the population was slowly being poisoned, a theory often cited for the fall of Rome. However, most modern archaeologists point out that the water in Rome was so hard, so full of calcium carbonate, that the inside of the pipes would become coated with a thick layer of mineral scale within months, effectively sealing off the lead from the water. So, the water Lucia is plunging her hands into is likely as safe, if not safer, than what flows from many modern taps. She watches the water flowing off the fabric. She is looking for the tear. When she lifts the wool, the water should run off in a clear, unbroken sheet, transparent as glass. If there is any milkiness, any foam, it needs more rinsing. She lifts a section of the magistrate's toga. The water cascades off it, sparkling in the shaft of sunlight hitting the tank. It is clear. The grey sludge is gone. The yellow oil stain is gone. The fabric is no longer a dirty rag. It is becoming a garment again. Clear, she announces. Clear here too, Sabina echoes from the other end of the tank. Now comes the wringing. This requires teamwork. You cannot wring a toga by yourself. It is too thick. Lucia takes one end, and Felix takes the other. They stretch the wet wool out between them, creating a hammock of damp white fabric. Twist, Felix commands. They begin to walk in a slow circle, twisting the fabric in opposite directions. The wool tightens, coiling into a rope. Water gushes out of the center, splashing onto the wet floor. They twist until the fabric is hard and tight, squeezing out the last dregs of moisture. It is a motion that looks like a tug-of-war, but it is actually a carefully coordinated embrace of tension. They hold the tension for a moment, letting the water drip, drip, drip. Then they relax. The rope of wool slackens. They repeat this for every garment. The heavy cloaks, the delicate tunics which are squeezed gently by hand, not twisted, and the sturdy blankets. It is repetitive, wet work. Lucia's tunic is soaked through across the stomach, where she leans against the tank. Her fingers are pruned and pale from the immersion. But there is a lightness to the air now. The heavy chemical atmosphere of the morning is gone, washed away down the drains. The workshop sounds different, instead of the rhythmic thumping of the stomp. There is the cheerful splashing of water and the squeak of wet hands on stone. Lucia piles the rinsed, wrung-out clothes into a clean basket. They are still damp, heavy and dark with water, but they are clean, deeply, chemically clean. She pauses to wipe her hands on a dry towel. The cold water has woken her up completely, sharpening her senses. She feels clean herself, merely by association. She looks at the pile of wet wool. It is ready for the next stage. The washing is done, but the whitening is a whole different art form. She signals to Felix, to the frames. They lift the basket again. It is lighter now than it was before the rinse, but still a burden. They carry it out of the wet zone, moving toward a strange, wooden structure in the corner of the courtyard that looks like a collection of beehives. Smoke is curling from beneath it. The sulfur room awaits. Lucia and Felix carry the basket of damp, clean laundry to the far corner of the courtyard, a space separated from the rest of the workshop by a low brick wall. This is the bleaching area, and the air here feels different, Raya, sharper and tinged with the faint, unmistakable scent of a volcano. They approach a row of strange, cone-shaped structures standing like silent sentinels against the wall. These are the Viminia cavea, or wicker frames. To a modern eye, they look remarkably like the oversized crinoline cages women would wear under their dresses in the 19th century, or perhaps like giant woven beehives. They are constructed from flexible willow branches, bent and lashed together to form a sturdy, bell-shaped dome about 5 feet high. This is the final and perhaps most dangerous stage of the whitening process. Washing with urine and clay removes the dirt and grease, but it does not truly whiten the wool. Natural wool, even from white sheep, has a creamy, yellowish tint. But the Roman elite do not want creamy. They want a blinding, snowy white. They want a white that dazzles the eye in the Mediterranean sun. A white that proclaims, I am a citizen of Rome, and I have nothing to hide. To achieve that supernatural brightness, water is not enough. They need fire and brimstone. Lucia begins the delicate task of draping the damp magistrate's toga over the wicker frame. She moves with the precision of a window dresser. The fabric must be spread evenly, with no deep folds or creases where the smoke cannot reach. She lifts the heavy, wet hem and hooks it over the top of the dome, letting the rest of the fabric cascade down the sides of the willow skeleton. She spreads the wool out, stretching it gently until the wicker frame is completely covered. It now looks like a ghostly tent, a white pyramid standing on the workshop floor. The dampness of the fabric is crucial here. The bleaching agent they are about to use is sulfur dioxide gas, and for the chemistry to work, the gas needs to dissolve into the water trapped in the fibers to form a mild, bleaching acid once the toga is arranged perfectly, creating a sealed chamber inside the wicker bell. Felix approaches with the fuel. He is holding a small iron pot containing jagged, bright yellow rocks. This is sulfur, in Latin mined from the volcanic landscapes of Italy, perhaps from the Phlegrean fields near Naples or the slopes of Mount Etna in Sicily. It is a beautiful substance, a vivid, electric yellow that seems almost unnatural against the grey stone of the workshop. But it is also a substance that demands respect. Felix places the iron pot on the ground, directly in the center of the floor space underneath the tented toga. He crouches down, striking a spark with a piece of flint and steel against a bit of dry tinder. A small flame catches. He drops the burning tinder into the pot of sulfur. Lucia watches closely. This is the moment where things can go wrong. If the flame is too high, it could scorch the expensive wool hanging just a few feet above it. If it is too low, it won't produce enough smoke. The sulfur catches fire. It doesn't burn like wood with a cheerful orange flame. It burns with an eerie, quiet blue light. It is a low, molten flame, like a spirit lamp, and almost immediately it begins to release a thick, acrid white smoke. This is the fumes of brimstone. The smell is instantaneous, sharp, choking, the scent of striking 1,000 matches at once. Cover it, Felix coughs. Scrambling back, Lucia quickly drops the hem of the toga down to the floor, sealing the bottom of the tent. The blue flame and the iron pot are now hidden inside the wicker cage, trapped beneath the damp wool. The smoke, having nowhere to go, rises up and fills the bell, forcing its way through the weave of the fabric. They step back quickly, retreating to the other side of the low wall. You do not want to breathe this smoke. Pliny the Elder, the great naturalist who wrote about everything from stars to statues, noted that sulfur fumes could cause stupor and were dangerous to the lungs. Ironically, Pliny himself would die a few decades earlier. In 79 AD, suffocated by volcanic fumes during the eruption of Vesuvius, grim reminder of the power of the Earth's chemistry. From a safe distance, Lucia watches the tented toga. She can see wisps of white smoke escaping through the pores of the fabric, curling up into the sunlight. The chemistry is happening now. Inside that wicker dome, the sulfur dioxide is attacking the pigment molecules in the wool, stripping away the yellow tint and leaving behind a stark, pure white. There is a fascinating linguistic connection here that ties Lucia's work directly to the highest levels of Roman politics. The Latin word for shining white is candid. A man who ran for political office would have his toga bleached extra white by a fooler like Lucia, to symbolize his pure intentions and honesty. Because he wore this bright white toga, he was known as a candidate. That is where we get the modern English word candidate. Every time we speak of a political candidate today, we are unknowingly referencing the sulfur bleaching techniques of an ancient laundry worker. This part of the process is slow. It requires no stomping, no scrubbing. It is a time of waiting. The workshop quiets down around this activity. The frantic energy of the morning rush has settled. The sun is high now, baking the courtyard. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about the architectural layout of these sulfur stations. Some archaeologists believe that fulleries had small, airtight rooms specifically designed for this smoking process to protect the workers from the fumes. Others point to the floor plans of Pompeii, which show pot marks in the open courtyards, suggesting the bleaching was done right out in the open air, just as Lucia is doing. The open-air theory implies a much harsher working environment, where the workers were constantly dodging clouds of sulfuric gas as the wind shifted. Lucia keeps an eye on the smoke. She also glances at a small relief carving set into the wall above the bleaching area. It depicts an owl sitting on top of a wicker frame. The owl is the sacred bird of Minerva, the goddess of wisdom and, crucially, the patron goddess of craftspeople and fuller. It is a quirky, fringe detail of the trade. Fullers were deeply superstitious about owls. You see them depicted frequently in fullery art, often perched right on the bleaching cages. It wasn't just religious devotion. The owl, with its large, staring eyes, was thought to ward off the evil eye or bad luck. In a business where a single mistaker scorched toga, a torn hem could ruin you financially. Having a divine night watchman painted on the wall provided a small sense of security. The smoke drifting from the wicker frame begins to thin. The blue flame inside is likely dying down, having consumed the yellow rocks. The process is Once the sulfur is gone, the reaction stops. Lucia approaches cautiously, holding a wet cloth over her nose and mouth. She lifts the edge of the toga just an inch to peek inside. The pot is dark. The air inside the tent is still thick with haze, but the fire is out. She drops the hem, They will leave it there for a while longer, letting the trapped gas finish its work. The toga needs to absorb every molecule of the bleach. The silence of the sulfur corner is a stark contrast to the noise of the street outside. Here, it is just the hiss of escaping gas and the heat of the sun. It is a dangerous kind of peace. The work is passive, yet potent. Lucia wipes her brow. The sun is now directly overhead. The shadows in the courtyard have shrunk to nothing. Her stomach gives a quiet rumble, audible only to her. The morning shift, the sorting, the mixing, the stomping, the rinsing, and the smoking is complete. The hardest physical labor is behind them. She looks at Felix and Sabina. They look as tired as she feels. Their tunics are damp, their skin is flecked with grey clay, and they smell faintly of burnt matches. But there is a looseness in their posture now. The urgency of the rush-hour delivery window has passed. Food? Sabina asks, voicing the thought that is on all of their minds. Lucia nods. Food. They turn away from the smoking white pyramids, leaving the chemistry to do its work in the dark, and head toward the shaded bench near the back of the peristyle. It is time to refuel the engines. Lucia, Felix, and Sabina retreat to a shaded corner of the peristyle, settling onto a low wooden bench worn smooth by years of midday rests. The workshop, usually a cacophony of splashing water and stomping feet, has fallen into a lull. The only sounds are the crackling of the wood under the heating cauldron and the distant, muffled roar of Rome outside the walls. It is the 6th hour, sexta horowat, we would call noon. In the ancient Mediterranean, this is the pivot point of the day. The sun is at its zenith, beating down on the terracotta roof tiles with a ferocity that demands a pause. The Romans, in their wisdom, understand that fighting the midday heat is a losing battle. The city slows down. Shops close their shutters halfway, the courts adjourn, and the frantic energy of the morning dissolves into a collective exhale. Lucia reaches for her lunch, wrapped in a coarse linen cloth. The meal is simple, a reflection of her station in life, yet it is hearty and comforting. It is prondium. For the Romans, this is not the main event of the day, that is, the cena, the dinner eaten in the evening. Prondium is merely a refueling stop, a cold snack eaten quickly, often without setting a table or washing hands. She unfolds the cloth to reveal a small earthenware bowl filled with pulse. This is the primordial dish of Rome. Long before there were emperors or marble temples, there was pulse. It is a thick porridge made from emmer wheat, boiled with water until it forms a dense, sticky mash. To a modern palate accustomed to fluffy white rice or pasta, emmer might seem tough and nutty, requiring a bit of chewing. But to Lucia, this is the taste of survival. It is the fuel that built the legions and fed the mob. The porridge is cold, left over from last night's cooking, but in the heat of the workshop, cold food is welcome. To make it palatable, she adds a splash of olive oil from a small flask and a few chunks of goat cheese that crumble under her fingers. Felix, ever the man of appetite, has something a bit more substantial. He pulls out a small wax-sealed jar of garum. This is the ubiquitous condiment of the ancient world, a fermented fish sauce that the Romans poured on absolutely everything from eggs to pear soufflés. There is a quirky, somewhat fringe detail about garum that often surprises people. We tend to think of it as a smelly, peasant food, but it was actually produced in graded vintages, much like fine wine. The highest quality, garum sociorum, was made from the blood and entrails of mackerel and was incredibly expensive. What Felix has, however, is likely Alec the dregs, left over at the bottom of the fermentation barrel. It is thick, pasty, and incredibly salty. He smears a generous amount onto a piece of hard bread. The smell is pungent, a sharp, briny aroma that cuts through the lingering scent of sulfur in the air. To him, it is delicious, a burst of umami that wakes up the tired senses. They eat in companionable silence for a few moments. The only sound, the scraping of wooden spoons against clay bowls. Sabina brings out a... She unstoppered the cork and pours a measure of dark red liquid into a shared cup, then tops it up with a generous amount of water from the fountain. This act of watering the wine is a cultural non-negotiable. To drink wine, neat or murrum, is considered barbaric, something only a drunkard or a non-Roman would do. The civilized standard is to dilute it, usually 1 part wine to 3 or 4 parts water. The drink they are sharing is likely posca, mixture of sour wine or vinegar, water, and herbs. It sounds unappealing to us, like drinking salad dressing, but in a world without refrigeration, it is a brilliant invention. The acidity kills bacteria in the water, and the electrolytes are refreshing. It is the Gatorade of the ancient workforce. Lucia takes a sip. The sharp vinegary tang hits the back of her throat, cool and revitalizing. She passes the cup to Felix. As they eat, a small, scruffy dog wanders into the courtyard from the street. Every workshop in Rome seems to have a semi-resident dog, usually a mix of breeds, kept around to chase rats and bark at strangers. This one, whom they simply call Lupus Wolf, sits hopefully near Lucia's knee, watching every spoonful of porridge with intense, soulful eyes. Historians and bioarchaeologists are currently engaged in a fascinating debate about the diet of people like Lucia. For a long time, the prevailing theory was the Mediterranean triad, that the poor lived almost exclusively on wheat, olive oil, and wine, with meat being a rare luxury reserved for festivals. It painted a picture of a population that was vegetarian by necessity. However, recent chemical analysis of bones found in Roman cemeteries tells a different story. The isotope data suggests that the average Roman, even the working poor, ate a surprising amount of animal protein. They weren't eating steak dinners, but they were consuming plenty of pork, cheese, and fish. The pigs of ancient Italy were herded into the forests to eat acorns, making pork a relatively cheap and abundant meat. So, when Lucia tosses a small piece of cheese rind to the dog, she isn't starving herself. She is likely part of a population that is better fed than many European peasants would be 1,000 years later. Lucia finishes her porridge and leans back against the warm brick wall, closing her eyes. The heat of the day is heavy now, a physical weight pressing down on the eyelids. This is the meridiatio, the midday rest from which we get the word meridian, and, eventually, siesta. For 15 minutes, they do not speak. They simply exist. In a life of hard labor, these stolen moments of stillness are precious. Lucia listens to the water bubbling in the rinsing tanks. It is a peaceful sound. She feels the rough texture of the brick against her shoulder, the coolness of the stone bench beneath her legs. This pause serves a social function as well. The workshop is a hierarchy, with Gaius at the top and the slaves and hired hands below. But during the meal, the lines blur slightly. They are just bodies resting in the shade. Felix breaks the silence with a low chuckle. Did you hear about the chariot driver? The red faction? Scorpus, Sabina asks, opening one eye. Crashed in the final turn, Felix says, shaking his head. Took out 2 blues with him. The crowd nearly rioted. They discuss the chariot races with the same casual, informed passion that modern co-workers might discuss a football match. The Circus Maximus is not just entertainment. It is the common language of the city. It is something they can all own, regardless of their status. They may not own villas or wear purple-bordered togas, but they own their loyalty to the greens or the reds. Lucia listens, but doesn't join in. Her mind is drifting to the afternoon ahead. The clothes are clean, but the finishing work remains. The brushing, the shearing, the pressing. It is detailed work, requiring a steady hand and a sharp eye. She enjoys it more than the morning wash. It feels less like cleaning and more like crafting. She stretches her arms over her head, feeling the muscles in her back pop. The sun has moved just enough that the shade on the bench is beginning to retreat. The golden light is creeping toward her sandals. Time, she whispers, more to herself than to them. Gaius appears in the doorway of the office, looking well-fed and drowsy himself. He claps his hands once, a soft sound in the quiet courtyard. Let's get the presses turning, everyone. The senator needs his toga by sunset. The magic spell of the Sexta-Hora is broken. The city is waking up for the second half of the day. The shutters will open, the courts will resume, and the noise will return. Lucia stands up, brushing the crumbs of emmer wheat from her lap. She picks up the empty bowl and the wines. The relaxation was brief, but it was enough. The food has settled in her stomach, warm and grounding. She takes a drink of water from the fountain to rinse the taste of cheese from her mouth. She looks at the drying racks where the sulfur-bleached togas are hanging. They are dry now, stiff and brilliant white in the sun. They look like clouds tethered to the earth. Let's go make them soft, she says to Sabina. They move back into the sunlight, ready to turn the rough, clean wool into something fit for a palace. Lucia stands before a tall wooden frame, the pressarium, where the now dry magistrate's toga has been hung. The fabric is brilliantly white, thanks to the sulfur bleaching, but it has lost its inviting texture. The combination of the urine soak, the clay scrub, and the drying heat has left the wool stiff and hard, almost like a piece of board. If a senator were to wear it now, it would chafe his neck and hang awkwardly, lacking the graceful drape that is the hallmark of Roman fashion. It falls to Lucia to restore the softness. To do this, she reaches for a tool that seems pulled from a fairy tale or a witch's pantry rather than an industrial workshop. She picks up a wooden paddle, about the size of a modern table tennis racket. Mounted securely onto the flat face of the wood is the dried, spiny skin of a hedgehog. This is not a figure of speech. It is the actual pelt of an errant, cured and dried until it is as hard as leather, with its hundreds of sharp, stiff spines pointing outward. Lucia runs her thumb along the edge of the tool, testing the bristles. They are sharp, but slightly flexible, perfect for the job. She approaches the hanging toga. With a firm, downward stroke, she drags the hedgehog skin across the surface of the wool. Sc rich scritch. Scritch, scritch. The sound is dry and rhythmic, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It is a sound that sets some people's teeth on edge, but to Lucia, it is the sound of refinement. What she is doing is called raising the nap. The sharp spines of the hedgehog catch the very tips of the wool fibers that have been matted down during the washing. They pull these tiny fibers upward, teasing them out of the tight weave as she works her way down the fabric. Stroke by stroke, the transformation is visible. The flat, hard surface of the wool begins to fuzzy up. It blooms, a layer of soft, velvety fluff. Tomentum rises from the cloth. This process doesn't just make the toga feel softer against the skin. It actually changes the appearance of the garment. The raised nap catches the light, giving the wool a rich, matte depth that hides the grid-like pattern of the weave. It makes the cloth look solid, substantial, and expensive. There is a fascinating and somewhat bizarre history behind the tool in Lucia's hand. We might smile at the idea of using a hedgehog to brush clothes, but in the Roman world, this was big business. The demand for hedgehog skins was so high that it actually led to complex trade regulations. In the 4th century, long after Lucia's time, there would be actual legislative decrees attempting to break up monopolies on hedgehog skins. It seems that unscrupulous merchants would hoard the skins to drive up prices, holding the laundry industry hostage. It is a delightful mental image, the mighty Roman Senate, masters of the known world, taking time out of their day to debate the price fixing of dead hedgehogs. It highlights just how vital the wool trade was to the Roman economy and how nature provided the best machinery. Lucia works with a steady rhythm. She has to be careful. If she presses too hard, the spines will snag and tear the thread, ruining the weave. If she presses too lightly, the nap won't rise, and the fabric will remain rough. It requires a tactile sensitivity, a feeling in the wrist that tells her exactly how much resistance the wool is giving. Sabina is working next to her on a different garment, but she is using a different tool. She holds a cluster of dried plant head steezels. The teasel plant, Dipsacus, produces a seed head covered in stiff, hooked bracts that are natural Velcro. The spines are better for this heavy wool, Lucia comments, pausing to pick a bit of lint out of her hedgehog brush. The teasels break too easily on the thick stuff, but the teasels are gentler on the fringe, Sabina counters, smoothing the edge of a delicate shawl. This friendly disagreement mirrors a genuine scholarly debate among historians of technology. For years, there has been an argument about when exactly the industry switched from animal spines to plant spines. Some texts use the word spine or spine interchangeably, making it hard to know if they meant the animal or the plant. It is likely that, as in this workshop, both were used side by side depending on the task. The fact that the teasel plant is still used today in some high-end woolen mills for the exact same purpose suggests that the Romans were, as usual, on to something timeless. The air in this part of the workshop is filled with a fine, golden dust. As Lucia brushes, tiny microfibers of wool are broken off and float into the air. They dance in the shafts of afternoon sunlight streaming through the portico, settling like snow on Lucia's eyelashes and hair. This flock or shearings is not wasted. It is swept up and sold to cushion makers to stuff pillows and mattresses. In Rome, nothing is thrown away. Lucia reaches the purple border of the magistrate's toga. She slows down. She switches her grip on the paddle, using just the edge of the skin to gently tease the nap of the purple stripe. The dye here makes the wool slightly more brittle, and a mistake would be costly. The purple stripe is the symbol of the man's power, but right now it is just a piece of cloth subject to Lucia's hand. There is a quiet subversion in this. The man who wears this toga commands legions or passes laws that affect millions. But he cannot walk out of his house until Lucia has brushed his clothes with a hedgehog skin. His dignity is entirely dependent on her labor. She steps back to inspect her work. She runs the back of her hand down the length of the fabric. It is no longer bawdy. It feels plush, warm, and yielding. It has become flannel-like. "Good," she whispers, But the process is not finished. Raising the nap has made the fabric soft, but it has also made it uneven. The fuzz stands up at different lengths, making the toga look slightly shaggy, like a sheep that has had a bad hair day. It looks unkempt. To the Roman eye, obsessed with order and geometry, shaggy is unacceptable. The nap must be perfectly even. It must be manicured. Lucia places the hedgehog paddle back on the shelf next to a jar of beeswax. She wipes the wool dust from her face, leaving a smudge on her cheek. The brushing is the brute force of the finishing process, creating the raw material of softness. Now she needs to refine it. She turns to a small table where a set of iron shears is waiting. These are large, scissor-like instruments, but with a sprung handle, similar to modern sheep shears. They gleam dully in the light. This next step requires the steady hand of a surgeon. One slip, and she will cut a hole right through the fabric. Lucia picks up the shears, testing the spring tension. Snip-snap. The sound is sharp and metallic, a contrast to the dry scratching of the spines. She looks at the toga, hanging shaggy and soft. It is ready for the haircut. Lucia lays the toga out on a large, padded table. While the brushing was done vertically, gravity is the enemy of the shearing process. To cut evenly, the fabric must be flat, supported, and absolutely still. She grips the iron shears, the forfex. They are a marvel of functional design. Unlike modern scissors with a pivot screw, these are made from a single piece of iron, bent into a U-shape at the handle, acting as a spring. When she squeezes, the blades cross. When she relaxes, they spring apart. It is a design so perfect in its simplicity that it remains virtually unchanged to this day in sheep farming. But Lucia is not shearing a sheep. She is manicuring a masterpiece. She leans over the table, bringing the blades down until they are hovering just millimeters above the weave of the cloth. She rests the flat of the bottom blade against the nap. She just R-A-I-S-E-D-S-N-I-P. Snip, snip dot. The sound is different from the brushing. It is sharp, metallic, and precise. It is the sound of a barber shop, but for wool. Lucia moves the shears across the fabric in a sweeping arc. She is cutting away the uneven tips of the fuzz she raised with the hedgehog skin. The goal is not to remove the nap entirely, that would undo all her hard work, but to trim it down to a uniform, velvet-like height. It is exactly like mowing a lawn to create a putting green. This is the most nerve-wracking part of the day. During the stomping, she could daydream. During the rinsing, she could chat. But here, she must hold her breath. A sudden sneeze, a cramp in the hand, or a moment of distraction could cause the points of the shears to dip. A cut in the fabric now would be catastrophic. You cannot patch a senator's toga without it being obvious. If she cuts a hole, the garment is ruined, and the cost comes out of the workshop's earnings or her own meager wages. Steady, she whispers to herself. As she clips, fine dust falls away from the blades. This is the tormentum, the shearings. It piles up on the table like grey snow. There is a fascinating fringe detail about these shearings. In a society that wasted nothing, this wool dust became a commodity in its own right. It was collected and sold to the makers of cheap mattresses and pillows. If you were a poor student or a struggling poet in Rome, you didn't sleep on feathers. You slept on the floor sweepings of a laundry shop. It was lumpy, and it smelled faintly of sulphur, but it was better than sleeping on bare wood. Lucia pauses to wipe the blades with an oiled rag. The iron must be kept slick to prevent it from dragging on the wool. The visual transformation of the toga is subtle but profound. Before the shearing, the fabric looked fuzzy and slightly chaotic. After the shearing, it looks solid. The surface is unbroken, a smooth expanse of white that seems to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It has become Rusa shaved. This is the difference between a rough country blanket and a piece of imperial fashion. Scholars have long debated whether this shearing was done by the fullers themselves, or if it was a specialized trade. Some Roman tomb reliefs show men called tonsors, barbers working on cloth. This led some historians to argue that the laundry process was highly fragmented, with clothes being sent out to different shops for different steps. However, most evidence now points to the large fullernicae being one-stop shops. It makes sense economically. Why pay a middleman when you can train Lucia to do it? Sabina comes over to inspect the work. She runs her hand against the grain of the nap. It feels dense and luxurious, like the coat of a well-groomed horse. Smooth, Sabina agrees. The magistrate will be pleased. He won't itch. That is a genuine concern. Roman wool could be incredibly itchy. Without the modern chemical softeners we use today, this mechanical softening, raising the nap and then shearing it smooth, was the only thing standing between a senator and a day of constant scratching during a long speech in the forum. Lucia works her way around the vast hem of the garment. Her hand begins to cramp from the repetitive squeezing of the stiff iron spring. She shakes her wrist out, flexing her fingers. Carpal tunnel syndrome is surely not a diagnosed condition in 115 AD, but the ache is real enough. She reaches the purple border again. This area requires even more finesse. The dye makes the threads slightly thicker, sitting higher than the white wool. She tilts the shears, feathering the edge so there isn't a jarring step down from the white to the purple. It is an artistic choice, a blending of textures. The afternoon light is shifting. The sharp, vertical rays of noon have softened into a slanting, golden haze. The dust motes in the air are glowing. The workshop is quieting down as the various teams finish their tasks. The stompers have gone home or are cleaning the tubs. The fires under the cauldrons are being banked for the night. Lucia makes the final clip on the corner of the toga. She blows away the last loose fibers. The toga lies on the table, a vast, snowy landscape. It is clean, it is white, it is soft, it is smooth, but it is not yet finished. It is currently a crumpled landscape. The washing and wringing have left deep creases and wrinkles in the wool. A Roman citizen cannot walk out in a wrinkled toga. It suggests a lack of discipline, a disorderly mind. The garment must be pressed until it is flat and sharp, ready for the screw. Felix asks, appearing at her elbow. He is wiping his hands on a towel, his shift in the tubs finished. Lucia nods, gathering the heavy fabric in her arms. Ready. They move toward the back wall, where a massive wooden contraption dominates the space. It looks like a torture device, but it is actually the final instrument of perfection, the screw press. Lucia and Felix stand before the pressorium, the heavy wooden screw press that dominates the back wall of the workshop. If the treading tubs were the engines of the operation, this machine is the anchor. It is a massive structure, built from dark, seasoned oak that has darkened almost to black over decades of use. Two thick upright posts rise from the floor to the ceiling, supporting a heavy crossbeam. Through the center of this beam runs a gigantic wooden screw, thick as a man's thigh, carved with a spiraling thread that represents the cutting edge of Roman technology. This machine is the final arbiter of the toga's shape. The shearing table made the wool smooth. The press will make it flat. In a world without electric irons, this device uses the brute force of mechanical advantage to crush the wrinkles out of the fabric before they can use the press. However, they must perform the delicate choreography of the fold. You cannot simply stuff a toga into the press. It is a semicircular garment of immense size, and how it is folded will determine how it hangs on the senator's body. Lucia takes one end of the long, straight edge aside that will sit against the wearer's neck, and Felix takes the other. They stretch it out between them, the white wool hovering above the clean floor. They begin to fold it, not in random squares, but in long, concertina-like pleats. They are careful to align the purple border so that it will sit flat. The heavy wool settles into place with a soft hump of air. They are reducing this 18-foot cloud of fabric into a neat, compact rectangle, no larger than a shield. Lucia moves to the press and slides a smooth wooden board, known as a tympanum, onto the base. She lays the folded toga onto the board, smoothing it one last time with her palms to ensure there are no hidden creases. If a crease is pressed in now, it will be permanent, locked into the fibers until the next wash. She then places another board on top, creating a sandwich of wood and wool. Up, she signals. Felix reaches up and grabs the horizontal handles the capstan bars that stick out from the head of the great screw. He begins to walk in a circle, pushing the bar before him. Creeeeeeeek. The sound of the press is deep and resonant. It is the groan of wood under tension, a slow, rhythmic complaint that echoes through the quiet workshop. As Felix turns the screw, the heavy upper plate of the press begins to descend. This mechanism is a fascinating piece of history. For centuries, the ancients used simple beam presses, basically a large log acting as a lever, weighted down with stones. It worked, but it was cumbersome and took up a lot of room. The vertical screw press, which appeared in Rome around the 1st century AD, was a technological revolution. It took the principle of the inclined plane and wrapped it around a cylinder, allowing a single person to generate thousands of pounds of downward pressure in a compact space. It is worth noting a quirky historical connection here. This exact mechanism, the upright wooden screw press used by Lucia to flatten laundries, the direct ancestor of the Gutenberg printing press. When Gutenberg was looking for a way to press paper onto type in the 1400s, he didn't invent a new machine. He simply adapted the wine and linen presses that had been in use since Lucia's time. The device that would eventually spread knowledge to the entire world began its life squeezing the water out of socks and grapes. As the plate makes contact with the top board, the resistance increases. Felix leans his shoulder into the bar, his sandals gripping the stone floor. Groan, thud. Groan, the pressure builds. The air trapped between the layers of wool is forced out with a faint sigh. The fibers are being crushed together, locking in the smoothness Lucia created with the shears. Historians and archaeologists are still engaged in a debate regarding the temperature of these presses. We know the Romans had box irons, metal boxes filled with hot coals for smoothing tunics. But for the large presses, it is unclear if they used heat. Some scholars argue that the tympana, the boards, were heated near the fire before being used, effectively making this a giant steam press. Others argue that the pressure alone, combined with the slight remaining dampness of the wool, was sufficient. Lucia is working with cold boards today, relying on the sheer, crushing weight of the oak to do the work. Once the screw is tight, Felix gives it one final, straining push. The wood shrieks in protest, then settles. He locks the bar in place with a rope loop. Now they wait. The toga is trapped. Under this immense pressure, The wool fibers are losing their elasticity, forgetting their crumpled state and memorizing this new, flat existence. It is a process of forced relaxation. Lucia takes a step back, wiping her hands. There is something deeply satisfying about the press. It is the only part of the process where the machine does the work. For the next hour, while they clean the shop, the press will stand there, silently exerting its force, holding the chaos of the fabric in a grip of perfect order. The workshop is beginning to wind down. The golden light of the afternoon is turning a deeper amber, stretching the shadows of the columns across the floor. The air is still and warm, filled with the scent of dried wool and the faint, sweet smell of the beeswax Lucia used on the equipment, while the press does its job. Lucia moves to the small table where the finished garments are stacked. She checks the inventory list, or rather, the set of wooden tags tied to the bundles. Roman laundry management was surprisingly sophisticated. We have found clay tokens and lead tags in excavations that served as claim checks. Each customer had a number or a symbol. If you lost your token, you didn't get your toga. She rearranges a few tunics, making space for the magistrate's toga once it comes out of the vise. The organization is key. A lost garment in ancient Rome wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a legal liability. The law of the 12 tables and subsequent legal codes had specific provisions for lost laundry. If a fuller lost a customer's clothes, they were liable for the full value. Given that a high-quality toga could cost as much as a small farm, Lucia's diligence is not just professional pride, it is financial survival. She glances back at the press. It stands silent, a monolith of dark wood. The tension in the screw is palpable, a stored energy that vibrates in the air. This is the final pause. The wash is done. The bleach is done. The shear is done. The press is the seal. When she unscrews that handle, the garment that emerges will be transformed. It will no longer be the stained, crumpled, oily thing that arrived in a basket this morning. It will be a symbol of Roman civilizations, stark, geometric, and imposing. Leave it for a bit longer, she murmurs to Felix, who has started sweeping the floor. Let it set. She walks over to a small shelf and picks up a bowl of white powder. This is the final touch, the cosmetic finish that will happen once the pressure is released. It is the equivalent of powdering a nose before stepping onto a stage. The press flattens the form, but the chalk gives it the glow dot. She runs the fine powder through her fingers. It is soft, cool, and undeniably white. The sun is dipping lower, and the time for delivery is approaching. But for now, the heavy wooden screw holds the world in place, squeezing out the imperfections of the day. Felix releases the rope loop holding the capstan bar. He gives a grunt of effort, pushing the heavy wooden handle in the opposite direction. Creaoc. The screw turns, releasing its grip. The pressure lifts. Lucia slides the top board off the press, revealing the toga beneath. It is transformed. The thick, chaotic wool has been tamed into a sleek, dense sheet of fabric. The wrinkles are gone, obliterated by the crushing weight of the oak. It lies there, flat and perfect, like a fresh page of papyrus waiting to be written on. But there is one final step. The toga is clean and it is smooth, but it is not yet blinding. To achieve that supernatural luminescence required by Roman high society, Lucia must apply the finishing makeup. She carries the pressed garment to a clean, dry table near the entrance, where the light from the street is strongest. On the table sits a bowl of fine, white powder. This is not the fuller's earth she used for washing earlier. That was for degreasing. This is krita, a form of pure white chalk or pipe clay, perhaps imported from the island of Comolas or dug from the white cliffs of the Mediterranean coast. Lucia dips a small, soft sponge into the powder. She taps off the excess, creating a small, localized cloud of white dust that hangs in the still air. She begins to rub the chalk into the fabric. She works in small circles, massaging the fine dust into the weave of the wool. This process is known as chalking, and it serves a dual purpose. First, it acts as a filler. The microscopic grains of chalk settle into the tiny gaps between the wool fibers, creating a perfectly smooth, unbroken surface. Second, and more importantly, it acts as an optical brightener. The chalk reflects the sunlight with a high intensity, masking any lingering yellowness in the wool and making the garment appear whiter than white dot. It is, in essence, a deception. Lucia is painting the cloth with dust. There is a wonderful, slightly cynical truth about Roman fashion hidden here. When we look at statues of senators, we imagine them as paragons of solid, marble-like virtue. But in reality, a senator walking into the forum was a bit of a walking dust cloud. If he brushed against a dark wall, he would leave a white smear. If you hugged him, he would come away looking like a baker. The pristine whiteness was a temporary, fragile facade maintained by the labor of people like Lucia. How she works. The air around the table fills with the scent of dry earth. It is a clean, mineral smell, like a dusty road after a long drought. Scholars have long debated the exact composition of this finishing powder. Pliny the Elder, our trusty guide to ancient technology, lists several different types of earth used for different finishes. He mentions Sardinian earth, which was cheap and used for colorful fabrics, and Umbrian earth, which was used for polishing. But for the toga, the consensus is that they used Simoleon earth in a dry state, or perhaps a mixture of gypsum and starch. The debate continues because, unlike the stone vats, the powder itself leaves little trace in the archaeological record. It was washed away or dusted off centuries ago. Lucia reaches a section of the toga where the weave is slightly looser. She applies a bit more chalk here, rubbing it in firmly with the heel of her hand. She is physically forcing the brightness into the cloth. The visual effect is immediate. As she rubs, the fabric seems to light up. The duller, creamy white of the natural wool is replaced by a stark, flat brightness. It is the difference between a piece of paper and a light bulb. This specific shade of white, this chalky, radiant brightness, has a powerful psychological effect on the Roman mind. They have two words for white: albus, which means a matte, neutral white, and candidus, which means a shining, dazzling white. Lucia is turning this toga from albus to candidus. It is from this process that we get the concept of candidacy. A Roman politician running for office would specifically ask his fuller to chalk his toga until it was blindingly bright. He would then walk through the forum, shaking hands and kissing babies, his glowing clothes symbolizing his pure, unblemished character. When you vote for a candidate today, you are linguistically voting for someone wearing a chalked toga. Lucia works her way to the edge of the garment. Her hands are coated in the white dust, making them look like the marble hands of a statue. She is careful to avoid the purple stripe. The chalk would dull the vibrant color of the dye, turning the regal purple into a dusty pastel. She uses a small brush to sweep any stray specks of powder away from the border, keeping the line between the white and the color razor sharp. The afternoon is waning. The golden rectangle of sunlight on the floor has stretched and thinned, climbing up the eastern wall. The sounds of the workshop are soft, the sweeping of a broom, the dripping of a tap. The rustle of fabric. Sabina comes over to help with the final fold. This is not the rough fold for the press. This is the presentation fold. They shake the toga out one last time. A fine mist of chalk dust rises from it, sparkling in the shaft of light. It looks like a cloud, Sabina says softly. It's heavy, though, Lucia replies, and it is. The addition of the chalk has added tangible weight to the garment. The magistrate will feel the gravitas of his office resting on his shoulders, quite literally. They fold the toga carefully, ensuring the purple stripe is displayed prominently on the top. They smooth it down, their hands moving in sync. The fabric feels cool and dry, with a slight powdery texture that is unique to a freshly fulled garment. It feels finished. Lucia takes a small wooden tag with the magistrate's name carved into it and ties it to the bundle with a piece of twine. She places the finished masterpiece on the delivery shelf, separate from the other clothes. It sits there, gleaming in the dim light of the shop, a beacon of order and cleanliness. The work is done. The transformation is complete. What walked in as a soiled, smelly, crumpled heap of wool is now a pristine symbol of power. Lucia wipes her chalky hands on her apron. She feels a quiet satisfaction. She doesn't care about the politics of the magistrate or the laws he will pass. She cares that his toga is white. She cares that the nap is smooth. She cares that, for one day at least, he will look perfect, thanks to her. She looks out at the street. The shadows are long now. The frantic commercial energy of the day is softening into the relaxed rhythm of the evening. It is time for the final leg of the journey. The toga must go home. I'll take it, Lucia says to Gaius, who is counting coins at his desk. It's on my way. Gaius nods, not looking up. Go and take the shortcut. Don't get that dust on anything. Lucia picks up the bundle. She cradles it carefully, like a baby, ensuring it doesn't touch her own dirty work tunic. She steps out of the workshop, leaving the smell of sulfur and wet stone behind her, and walks back out into the living city. Lucia steps out of the Follonica and back into the street. The transition is jarring. She leaves behind the cool, damp quiet of the workshop, with its smell of wet stone and clean earth, and enters the warm, golden chaos of the late afternoon. The sun is dipping toward the Janiculum hill across the river, casting long, dramatic shadows that stretch down the alleyways like fingers of darkness. She holds the bundle of the magistrates, toga high against her chest, wrapping her arms around it protectively. It is a package of pure white perfection in a city that is decidedly dusty. She must navigate the streets like a ship sailing through a reef, dodging dirty children, stray dogs, and the splashing of water from upper-story windows. Her destination is the Palatine Hill. To get there, she must leave the super rather crowded, noisy valley of the poor and climb. In Rome, geography is destiny. The higher you live, the richer you are. The wealthy want the breeze, the view, and the distance from the malaria-carrying mosquitoes of the marshy lowlands. She walks toward the Via Sacra, the sacred way, the main artery of the Forum. The crowd here is thinning out. The frantic business dealings of the morning are over. The courts have closed. The bankers have packed up their tables. Now, the street belongs to people heading home for dinner or cena. She smells the roasting pork and baking bread drifting from the open-fronted shops, a savory reminder that she hasn't eaten since her bowl of porridge at noon. She turns onto the Clivus the steep, paved road that winds its way up the slope of the Palatine. The incline is sharp. Lucia feels the burn in her calves, the same muscles she used all morning in the treading tubs. But there is a different rhythm to this walk. It is slower, more deliberate. She is carrying the property of a powerful man, and that gives her a temporary, borrowed status. People step aside for the white bundle, if not for the woman carrying it. As she ascends, the city changes around her. The tall, teetering apartment blocks of the Subura fall away, replaced by high stone walls that hide sprawling private mansions. The noise of the city, the shouting, the hammering, the rumbling of carts begins to fade, turning into a distant, muffled hum. It is a phenomenon that still exists in Rome today, the sudden, startling quiet of the exclusive neighborhoods. The air changes, too. The sharp scent of garlic, sweat, and open sewers is replaced by the fragrance of pine trees, laurel hedges, and jasmine spilling over the garden walls. It smells like money. It smells like leisure. Historians and archaeologists have long debated the exact social composition of the Palatine Hill during this period. For centuries, it was described as the exclusive enclave of the emperor and the ultra-richer Beverly Hills of antiquity. But recent excavations suggest a more complex reality. They have found evidence of smaller service quarters and shops tucked in between the palaces. It seems that even in the most exclusive zones, the rich could not exist without a support network of the working class living in their shadow. Rome was never truly segregated. The layers just sat closer together. Lucia reaches the top of the hill. She is breathing hard, a light sheen of sweat on her forehead. She pauses for a moment to catch her breath, leaning against a marble fountain. From here, she can look down at the Forum Romanum below. It looks like a toy model, the white marble temples, the red-tiled roofs, the tiny figures moving between the columns. It puts her own life into perspective. She is down there, in the dust, while the people she serves live up here. In the clouds, she approaches the heavy wooden doors of the magistrate's villa. It is a fortress of privacy. There are no windows on the ground floor facing the street, only blank stone walls. The Roman home was an inward-looking world, turning its back on the chaos of the city to focus on the peace of the internal garden. She reaches for the door knocker. A heavy bronze ring held in the mouth of a lion. Thud, thud. The sound is solid and deep. A moment later, a small viewing hatch slides open. A pair of eyes inspects her. Then the heavy door swings inward. She is greeted not by the magistrate, of course, but by the ostiarius, the doorkeeper. He is a slave, an older man with greying hair and a tunic that is better quality than Lucia's own. There is a quirky, slightly grim detail about the ostiarius in Roman history. In earlier, rougher times, the doorkeeper was often chained to the doorpost to prevent him from wandering off or deserting his post. By Lucia's time, this practice had mostly faded in the city houses, replaced by a small, dedicated room for the porter. But the symbol of the chained dog remained in the cultural memory. In fact, as Lucia steps into the vestibule, she looks down at the floor. Set into the mosaic pavement is a depiction of a black dog with bared teeth, crouched as if to spring. Beneath it are the words Cave Canum. Beware of the dog. It is a warning to thieves, but also a playful joke for guests. The real dog is likely asleep in the garden, and the ostiarius is hardly a threat. Delivery from the fullery, Lucia says, her voice echoing in the stone entryway. The doorkeeper nods, looking at the bundle. Just in time. The master is dressing for a banquet at the house of Tacitus. He gestures for her to place the bundle on a marble table in the hallway. Lucia sets it down gently. She unties the twine and pulls back the protective cloth. The toga spills out, gleaming in the light of the oil lamps that have just been lit in the house. It is flawless. The chalk finish catches the flickering flame, glowing with that candid whiteness. The nap is smooth as velvet. The folds are sharp as a knife edge. The doorkeeper runs a critical finger over the purple border. He nods, satisfied. Good work. Better than the last batch. He reaches into a pouch at his belt and hands Lucia a small coin of quadrans. It is a tiny tip, barely enough to buy a cup of wine, but she accepts it with a nod of thanks. The real payment will be settled later, between the magistrate, steward, and Gaius, but this small coin is for her. It is the acknowledgement of her climb. Tell Gaius we will send another bundle on the Ides, the doorkeeper says, already turning to pick up the toga. I will, Lucia replies. She turns and walks back out through the heavy doors. They close behind her with a definitive thud, sealing the world of marble and perfume away from her once again. She stands alone on the street. The sun has set now. The sky above the Palatine is a deep, bruised purple, fading into indigo. The first stars are appearing, tiny pinpricks of white light that remind her of the chalk dust on her hands. She feels a sudden, immense lightness. The burden is gone. The heavy 18-foot woolen cloud is no longer her responsibility. Her arms feel floaty and free. The tension of the delivery, the fear of dropping it, the fear of dust, the fear of the client's disapproval evaporates. She begins the walk back down the hill. Going down is easier than going up. Gravity is on her side now. She descends the Clivus Palatinus, her sandals slapping softly on the stones. The city below is transforming. The work noises have stopped, replaced by the murmurs of families eating dinner, the barking of dogs, and the distant sound of a flute playing in a tavern. She is no longer Lucia the washer, or Lucia the shearer, or Lucia the delivery girl. She is just Lucia. The day's labor has been extracted from her muscles and delivered to the top of the hill. What remains is hers. She heads not back to the shop, but toward the river. The air is cooling rapidly, a fresh breeze blowing in from the Tyrrhenian Sea, flushing the heat out of the valley. It is the time of day the Romans call crepusculum, the twilight, the doubtful time, when shapes blur and the hard edges of the world soften. She is ready for the final act of her day. Not work, but rest. Lucia descends the final slope of the Palatine, her feet finding the familiar rhythm of the descent. The transition from the hill of the wealthy back to the valley of the people is not just vertical, it is atmospheric. The air grows thicker, heavier with the sense of cooking fires and the damp, earthy breath of the river. She turns not toward her apartment immediately, but toward the Tiber. It is a slight detour, but one she craves. After a day spent with contained water, water in tubs, water in tubs, water in lead pipes, she needs to see the wild water. She walks out onto the embankment near the Forum Boreum, the ancient cattle market. Here the city opens up. The Tiber River, Tiberi's Potter, Father Tiber, flows dark and steady before her. Under the moonlight, the water looks like a sheet of hammered silver, rippling around the stone piers of the Pons Aemilius. It is the oldest stone bridge in Rome, a sturdy, arched spine connecting the city to the working-class district of Trastevere on the far bank. The river is quiet now, but it is never silent. Lucia can hear the lap of water against the hulls of the grain barges tied up at the docks. These boats have come all the way from Astia, the port on the sea, carrying the wheat from Egypt that feeds the city. They rock gently, creaking against their moorings, sleeping giants waiting for the morning OFF, LOAD, standing here. Feeling the cool river breeze on her face, Lucia watches a patrol of vigils pass by. These are the night watchmen of Rome, a combination of police force and fire brigade. They walk in a small squad, carrying torches and buckets. One of them carries a heavy axe, used to break down doors in case of a fire. They nod at her as they pass a silent acknowledgement between night walkers. Historians often debate the safety of Rome at night. The satirist Juvenal wrote terrifying accounts of muggings, falling roof tiles, and chamber pots being emptied onto the heads of passersby, painting the city as a death trap after dark. But other scholars argue that this was likely literary exaggeration. For a woman like Lucia, a local who knows the rhythm of her own neighborhood, the streets are not a labyrinth of fear, but a familiar map of shadows and light. She knows which corners to avoid and which taverns stay open late. Spilling warm light and laughter onto the stones, she turns away from the river, the smell of the wet silt lingering in her nose, and heads back into the density of the buildings. The city has changed its soundtrack once again. The day shift noise of hammers and shouting has been replaced by the night shift. Noise of wheels. Remember the Lex Iulia Municipalis, the traffic law that banned heavy wagons during the day. Well, the ban has lifted. The sun has set, and the gates have opened. Lucia hears the low, distant rumble of the great ox carts entering the city. They are bringing in the timber, the stone, and the wine for tomorrow. The cycle of the city is seamless. As one part of Rome goes to sleep, the logistical heart of the empire wakes up to restock the shelves. She reaches her insula. The tall building looms dark against the sky, a cliff face of brick and plaster. A few windows glow with the orange light of oil lamps, little squares of warmth in the gloom. She pushes open the street door. The stairwell is pitch black. She doesn't need a light. Her feet know the way. She counts the stairs in her head. 1, 2, 3. Turn, first floor. 1, 2, 3. Turn, second floor. The smells of the building tell her the stories of her neighbors' evenings. On the second floor, the smell of boiled cabbage and cumin. On the third floor, the sweet scent of a burnt offering someone has lit incense at their family shrine, perhaps praying for a sick child or a better job. She climbs higher. The air gets cooler as she rises. Fourth floor, she opens her door. Her room is exactly as she left it, though now it is filled with shadows. The moonlight filters through the slats of the shutters, painting stripes of silver on the floor. She does not light a lamp. Olive oil is expensive, and she knows where everything is. She unlatches the shutters and pushes them open one last time. The view is different now. The sea of rooftops has become a landscape of silhouettes. The smoke from the chimneys has thinned, drifting lazily across the stars. Far away on the Capitoline Hill, she can see the fires burning in the temple of Jupiter, the eternal hearth of the state. It is a comforting sight. The gods are awake, so she doesn't have to be. Lucia steps back and unties her belt. She slips off her work tunic, the fabric stiff with the memory of sweat and starch. She folds it, neatly habit, is hard to break and places it on the stool. She washes her face in the basin, the water cool and refreshing. She scrubs her hands one last time, checking for any remaining chalk dust. They are clean, rough, red, and tired, but clean. She sits on the edge of her pallet. The straw mattress rustles softly. It is not a feather bed like the one the magistrate will sleep in tonight, but to her aching back, it feels like a cloud. She pulls the heavy wool blanket up to her chin. Lying there, she listens to the building settle. The creak of timbers, the murmur of voices through the wall, the distant bark of a dog. These are not annoyances. They are the heartbeat of her world. They are the sounds of life continuing. She thinks of the toga she delivered. It sits now in a cedar chest in a marble villa, perfect and white, waiting for the sunrise. She thinks of the mountain of dirty clothes that will be waiting for her tomorrow morning. The wine stains, the mud, the dust. The cycle will start again. The water will flow, the urine will ferment, the sulfur will burn. But that is for tomorrow. For now, the press is open. The vats are drained. The shears are closed. Lucia closes her eyes. The rumble of the wagons on the street below becomes a rhythmic, soothing drone, like the sound of the ocean. It vibrates through the floor, a lullaby of commerce and stone. Her breathing slows, matching the pace of the city. The tension in her legs, the ache in her shoulders, the sharpness of the ammonia fumes, it all fades away, dissolved into the soft, grey warmth of sleep. The last thing she sees in her mind's eye is not the dirty water, nor the heavy press, but the white toga hanging in the sun. Bright, clean, done, and then the city of Rome, the eternal city, continues its night watch without her. Lucia is asleep. And so we leave Lucia there, safe in the quiet heights of her room, wrapped in the warmth of her rest. The great busy wheel of the Roman day has turned its full circle, and now it pauses, just for a moment. In the stillness of the night, the fires in the workshops have burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft orange light on the empty tubs and the silent presses. The water in the aqueducts continues its long, dark journey from the mountains, flowing steadily, endlessly, a liquid thread connecting the hills to the city, waiting to bring freshness to the morning. But for now, it flows unheard. Let the image of the white toga fade from your mind, that brightness softening into a gentle, milky grey. Let the sound of the busy streets drift away, becoming nothing more than a distant, rhythmic hum, like the sound of the sea in a shell. The stone walls of history are not hard or cold tonight. They are strong and protective, holding the stories of the past in a safe, quiet embrace. You have walked the ancient streets. You have seen the work of the day completed. You have earned this rest. There is nothing left to sort, nothing left to scrub, nothing left to carry. The basket is empty. The work is done. The night air is cool and still. The stars above are the same stars that watched over the hills of Rome, steady and timeless. They watch over you now, drifting slowly across the velvet sky. Breathe in the quiet. Breathe out the day. Let yourself drift on the current of the river, floating gently towards the sea of sleep.